There's a lot of legendary comedy sets that are talked about often in the world of comedy, such as Bill Burr's Philly Rant, Michael Richards' Meltdown at the Laugh Factory, or Bill Hicks' censored set on Late Show with David Letterman. One set that isn't talked about as often was the infamous arrest of Lenny Bruce and George Carlin on December 5th, 1962 at the Gate of Horn nightclub located in Chicago, Illinois, where George and Lenny were escorted out of the venue and taken to jail in the same exact cop car. Lenny Bruce would be brought up on charges of violating obscenity laws, while George Carlin was taken to jail for refusing to identify himself when asked to do so by a police officer. This was a comedy show that will live in infamy because of Lenny Bruce's ballsy and antagonistic nature when doing his act on stage, and also his refusal to adhere to the obscenity laws that were merely enforced to restrict artistic expression. To begin with, this show happened during a time when the counterculture movement in the United States was just starting to emerge in the early 1960s. This movement was rooted largely in opposition to the Vietnam War and also the traditional norms that existed throughout the United States. The free speech movement would also take place in the 60s, but not until 1964, which was 2 years after one of Lenny Bruce's many arrests for violation of obscenity laws. Before we get into the content of the show where Lenny was arrested, it's important we have a solid understanding of what he had done up to this point. Lenny Bruce was no average Joe at this point in the world of comedy. In fact, before his arrest at Gate of Horn, he had just released a very well-received comedy special that he had taped at Carnegie Hall on February 4th, 1961. Even with Lenny's reputation for using highly explicit language and off-color material, he still performed at this prestigious venue with nearly 3,000 people in attendance. In addition to this, later that year, Lenny had begun a common trend in his career, which was getting arrested for violating obscenity laws right in the middle of a performance. Prior to the Gate of Horn arrest, Lenny Bruce had most recently faced charges at the Old Jazz Workshop on October 1st, 1961 in San Francisco, California for using the word cocksucker while performing on stage. While the cops found Lenny's act to violate obscenity laws, he would end up going to court and being acquitted by the jury. Even though he was exonerated of the charges he faced, the high-profile nature of this case led to Lenny having the eyes of law enforcement on him like never before. He had other trouble with the law aside from the obscenity charges, but these were few and far between his numerous charges for obscenity. Then on December 5th, 1962, the Gate of Horn show would be underway, and Lenny Bruce had planned to do his act exactly as he had done it before in numerous other cities. Unbeknownst to him, a young George Carlin would be in attendance with his wife, Brenda Carlin. At this time, George was a very young comedian at only 25 years old. He hadn't yet leaned into the counterculture dissonance that would make him into the household name in comedy he later became. At this time, he was most well known for characters he played on television such as the hippy-dippy weatherman and also his uncanny impressions of John F. Kennedy and other figures. Anyway, the show would begin and everything at this point was going according to plan. Then approximately 50 minutes into Lenny's performance, the cops rush onto the stage and arrest him for violating obscenity laws. If you look on YouTube, you can actually find a bootleg audio tape of Lenny Bruce's set from Gate of Horn where the cops arrest him. And right before he was taken off stage, Lenny was joking about Jews, but it's unclear if that was the specific joke that got him taken off stage.
Oh shit, I really did. Wake up quick, out the back way. The bricks move, anything. It's Super Jew. Miss Holding joke. All right, now, okay, the whole place is blocked off, and, oh, I knew that, all right. Everybody have a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have new star of our show.
After a long silence, you can hear the MC address Lenny being taken off stage. After this, a musical group starts to play, and members of the audience begin to file out of the venue. The Gate of Horn venue was serving alcohol at the time, so as the police escorted people out of the showroom, they repeatedly asked for members of the audience to show their ID. According to George Carlin, the police were going to try and find an underage member of the audience so that they could legally attack the venue after platforming Lenny Bruce. More on that later, but for now, George Carlin was leaving the building, and he was admittedly very drunk in typical Irish fashion. Then he tells the story in an interview of how he was arrested and what made the cop take him in.
They began to check people's IDs, and they had the people leave the club through the only door, the upstairs only door, one by one show their ID. And we purposely waited to be almost the last people just to watch all this going on. So when I got to the door and the police was there, ID, you want to see your ID? I said, I don't believe in ID. You know, just a smart-ass Irish guy, a little drunk, who didn't like authority anyway, you know, and didn't really care much for regulations my whole life. So he was a little exasperated by this point, this policeman. I guess he was in plainclothes. And he sort of grabbed me by the collar of the suit and you know, the baggy pant of my ass, and kind of bum rushed me down the stairs, you know, kind of forcing me down the stairs and on my way out.
So George being arrested and taken to jail in the same police cruiser as Lenny Bruce is an amazing story. Even though Lenny was arrested while trying to express himself freely, and George Carlin was just being anti-authority and a bit of a prick, it's still a legendary story in the world of comedy. And it gave birth to this iconic picture from the night of the arrest. This event caused the Gate of Horn venue to increase in popularity in the short term, but it ended up being a net negative for the owners of the club because, as mentioned earlier, the police scoured the show looking for anyone underage. They would end up finding several members of the crowd that were not 21, and this led to the Gate of Horn losing their ability to sell drinks. The YouTube channel Newberry Library actually has a video on this where they shortly discuss this event and how it ultimately led to the shutdown of Gate of Horn.
He, in the middle of his set here in 1962, he was arrested, and the Gate of Horn lost their liquor license. And unfortunately, that sort of was the end of the Gate of Horn because it closed in 1964, not long after the liquor license was revoked.
So even though this didn't end the Gate of Horn right away, losing their liquor license was the nail in the coffin and made it a lot harder for them to be profitable. After this, over the course of the next few years, Lenny Bruce would find himself being arrested several more times for violating obscenity laws while performing stand-up comedy. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, in 1964 the free speech movement would start to gain a lot of traction, and it would end up changing the course of America and free speech forever. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Lenny's style of comedy, but there's no doubt that he was pushing the envelope with his act, and he should have absolutely had the right to say whatever he wanted uninterrupted by the police. As time went on, he would start to talk about some of his legal battles in his act, and he would even go on tirades against fascism and censorship. He even found himself being outright banned from several US cities and even the United Kingdom after a performance at Peter Cook's comedy club called The Establishment. Furthermore, George Carlin would end up finding his own counterculture identity much later on in his career also, and he himself would be arrested several times as well for violating obscenity laws for his infamous 7 dirty words routine consisting of the 7 words you can't say on TV. This story is one of the most fascinating parts about the art of stand-up comedy and how it wasn't always as glamorous as it is now, and I'm happy I could document it for all of you watching. Anyway, what did you guys think? Do you think that Lenny Bruce was justified doing this off-color material, or are you one of those bootlickers that thinks he should have been arrested? Also, was George Carlin being an asshole by not showing the cop his ID? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I also have videos about the Philly rant and the Laugh Factory meltdown if you guys want to check those out. I also have a banger video about Saturday Night Live just in case that's your thing. But anyway, that's all I got for you. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.